Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Hosana Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at a number of developments, of course, with reference to the economic situation of the country. Amid, of course, all of the political crisis that is going on in the country, there are huge economic challenges that Pakistan has been facing for quite some time now, especially with reference to the IMF bailout package, which still has no sight to be seen. And this is important in terms of what has happened over the weekend as well in the statement coming in from the IMF on Monday earlier this week. We know that the Prime Minister of Pakistan spoke earlier to the MD IMF and spoke about the stalled issue between what is going on at the moment with the IMF and Pakistan, and why when earlier all the conditions were met by Pakistan that we still haven't seen the 9th review coming through. Something that the Finance Minister also spoke about and said that this is something that's going to be quite embarrassing for the IMF, and this is not something that should happen at this critical juncture after all the conditions have been met by Pakistan. It's also important to note that despite the conversation that was held between the Prime Minister and the MD IMF, a statement coming in from the IMF resident staff in the country pointed towards political developments, which is odd, something that was also echoed in the statement itself of the IMF to make such a statement, saying that they are hopeful that there is going to be peaceful progress in Pakistan and that everything is going to be aligned as per the constitution, and this is what the IMF is hoping for in terms of the challenges that Pakistan is facing. And of course, with reference to what has been going on with the country, this is an important development, especially when we know that the package is going to expire from a month from now, and there is not a lot of time in terms of the staff level agreement and the board meeting to be held, even though there are concerns with regards to Pakistan's stance that may be possible if the IMF proceeds with a board meeting after the staff level agreement for a period of 2 weeks and actually goes ahead with that plan. But whether or not, of course, the IMF actually pursues that, or even if it's possible in the current scenario, is a huge question mark. We also know that furthermore questions or conditions have been raised by the IMF, especially with reference to the budget, which seems to be quite expansionary in scope with reference to what the IMF would like Pakistan to move forward with. And we also know that the Prime Minister has also talked about this with the Finance Ministry, saying that the budget conditions may be shared with the IMF as to what the government is planning. But this, of course, puts huge question marks as to whether or not this is something new that the IMF is bringing to the table now at this important point, or is something that Pakistan will be able to actually take care of, and what other sort of reasons may persist in terms of the economic challenges that the country faces. And if the option and the hope of the IMF bailout package seems less and less, what other alternatives are there for Pakistan to actually pursue and make sure that the country doesn't default or doesn't go through an increasingly difficult economic crisis, more than what we're seeing right now, of course. So that is going to be our focus in the first segment, where we'll try and explore all of these details and see where the country is headed and what is going on with regards to the IMF. We'll also, in our last segment, take a look at what is going on in the neighborhood, especially in India, where we know that the northeastern state of Manipur has been experiencing a lot of difficulty, especially with regards to ethnic violence, which reportedly has resulted in more than 80 people who have lost their lives. We also know that the Interior Minister, Amit Shah, also met with the senior security forces and leaders of the community in order to, of course, put to rest the kind of violence that has taken place, which initially started about a month ago with the Regional High Court that advised on the inclusion of a particular ethnic tribe as on the list of the disadvantaged tribes. And this is important in terms of how the decision or the announcement by the court allows the majority Hindu community in the area to gain access to reservation in education and government jobs available to the disadvantaged people of the tribe. And it's important, of course, in terms of whatever is going on within the country elsewhere as well, and how exactly will this be taken care of. So we're going to try and take a look at all of that at the end of the show today as well. For this and more, as always, I've been joined in the studios by Senior Analyst Farrukh Pitafi, and for our first segment regarding the economic situation of Pakistan, we've also been joined online by Senior Analyst Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. Thank you very much, Dr. Khaqan, for joining us and being a part of the debate. It's a pleasure to have you as always. We would like to, of course, first of all, talk about the kind of controversial statements that have been coming in, and a lot of discussion has been going on around why exactly such a statement was made, particularly also after a conversation between the Prime Minister and the MD of the IMF. We understand that the statement itself points towards the fact that this is not usual of the IMF to comment on the political situation of countries, and we also know that a lot of comparisons are being drawn with other countries as well, such as Egypt, where the conditions, the political conditions are also quite volatile, perhaps more so than Pakistan, but still the IMF has restrained itself from commenting on the situation and has not impacted the packages or programs by this institution. And so what really is the problem or different here with the situation in Pakistan, that you think that the IMF really had to come out and say that, and especially after conversation was held between the MD and the Prime Minister? Dr. Khaqan, you have to unmute yourself. We are unable to hear you.
So Sana, good to be with you and Pitafi sir. This is truly, serious for Pakistan. One, Pakistan is wanting to do the IMF program. So I have no doubt to rely on the statements of the authorities. The seriousness can also be seen by the fact that the Prime Minister made another attempt, and this is the second attempt. When the IMF delayed its mission from 3rd November onwards, the Prime Minister had to intervene. So this is the second time the Prime Minister has had to intervene and speak with the MD. And I presume it was a long call and many things were discussed. And following that, Nathan Porter, the mission chief from the IMF side, has issued a statement. So let me first go on to the difficult side of the statement, which is the unusual part, in which he talks about, of course, the certainty of the political cycle, the certainty of following the constitution. Um, if I take a positive side to it, I think what he's trying to say is that the world would like to see how is there going to be a transition in August, in any case, to a government which is going to be an interim setup and then an election. Is that how things are going to be? Um, the positive side is that what he's trying to do is ascertain that you need some monies in June, and then if there is a 3 month gap with the interim setup coming in, then how do you fund that? So he's trying to find some kind of certainty there. That's my positive spin to it. The negative spin, of course, is as people are saying that you're intervening in our affairs and all the other things. But those people should also remember that between the IMF and Pakistan, there is a certain mistrust. The geopolitics is not as favorable to Pakistan as it was when we did, for example, the last program, or even we started with this program. The world itself is in a turmoil, so everyone's a bit jittery. That's another reason. Then there is CPEC, China, their loans. So there is a host of things behind this. But following with the positive lead, he's trying to ascertain how this would work, is the fact that you need $6 billion according to the IMF staff. Let's say even if this was not 6 billion and it was $4-5 billion, what Pakistan authorities are saying, because the current account is down, even then you need those monies to flow in from Saudi Arabia and UAE, and some reprofiling and some refinancing to be done by China. Even China has commented that Pakistan should have a political cycle and a determination of a political cycle. And so, I mean, I don't want to take the tussle further with the IMF. I want to be tactical right now. I want to say to the nation, let's be tactical, keep our heads down, get into the IMF ninth review, because you have only $4 billion in the kitty, and you have $4 billion of payments to be made in June, along with the fact that China will take a major part of it and re-roll for us. But still, without the IMF, there would be a pressure on the reserves. The second thing he's saying is take the dollar peg off. The government has acted actually very quickly. Again, a pat on the back. Today, the government went ahead and said, yes, there is a big difference between the open market and the market of the interbank. So what they did is that they took off the pressure from the open market by saying that if Sana was to use her credit card in London, her payment can now be charged on the interbank rate and the monies would come through the interbank market. So that would reduce $4 to $5 million of pressure on the open market. It may be a minimal sum, but it's at least a direction. And I'm happy that the authorities reacted very quickly on it. And the
Right,
third thing,
absolutely.
which
Yes, go ahead.
and the last thing is the budget, and we can talk about it later. I mean, that the contours of the budget should be responsible. In any case, we want to have a responsible budget. Whether the fund is there or not, you want to have a good budget. A bit of relief to the people, but still be sensible about it, bring the fiscal deficit down, and so on.
Absolutely, and we'll definitely talk a bit more about that as well. But Farrukh, of course, Dr. Khaqan seems to be taking the statement coming in from the IMF in a more positive light. But we also, of course, understand, and as the statement itself pointed out, that it's unusual for IMF to do that. I want to understand whether or not this will impact in terms of a conditionality for this bailout package to actually materialize, that the political situation or the House has to be in order before the IMF actually decides to move, even if other conditions, other economic conditions are met.
Do you want a diplomatic answer, Sana, or a real one?
A real one always.
Right. So I think that this is nothing but a nasty, intervention, which is basically premised on the fact that you want to deflect your own responsibility and keep on, focusing more on Pakistan's internal fault lines, and through that you actually gain more time and keep on punishing Pakistan. I think at this moment the statement that came out from IMF was clearly political, and I don't think that there is any room for such politics from an institution that is supposed to actually stabilize the global economy rather than become an instrument in any power's hand. When I was thinking about answering you, I was thinking that I'm going to actually, one thing that I keep on bragging about is, my recent skill of cooking. And for cooking, you have to actually calculate many elements and you have to introduce many variables, and then you ensure that you get the kind of products you need. So I thought that my answer should be built on three aspects. The first one is, of course, global power politics that I usually talk about, and then, of course, the element of conspiracy in it. And the second should be hardcore macroeconomics that we have to focus because the budget and the elections are so nearby. And then the third one, of course, because our finance minister also believes in spirituality. So there should be a dash of spirituality or some kind of, superstition in it. But the first part is simple. I think that, tip of hat to India. India has been gaining influence in past, many election cycles of the US. And we have seen that during Donald Trump's time, IMF got its chief economist, who is actually an ex-Indian, Geeta Gopinath. Right now, she is the first, deputy MD of IMF. And she is very influential, Sarah. I think that every time my Prime Minister talks to the MD of IMF and then our economist actually, or finance minister, talk to their economist or somebody relevant, it will be advisable to actually talk to Geeta Gopinath as well, because she controls a lot of chips at this moment. And I think that throughout this entire situation, India had us where it wanted us to be. FATF, similarly, IMF's very rigorous and punishing program. Similarly, they have actually worked out somehow our internal, fault lines as well, and they keep on exploding or exploiting them. You saw what happened on May 9th. It was essentially an outcome of similar kind of fifth generation warfare. Let me also give you another example. If you are going to actually manipulate at the micro level, then anybody who is watching can also see that within PMLN, there is also a divide. There used to be a divide between House of Shehbaz and House of Nawaz, and then there was a divide between Ishaq Dar Saab and Miftah Ismail. So somehow whatever was done, but it is very easy to trigger those fault lines. And now Isaac Das are in power, but it is not a chessboard that he has created. So in this situation, everything that you try to do actually backfires, and that has been backfiring, right? Because of that situation, I think that you'll have to talk to all the elements that are there to actually get out of the economic hole that we actually dug ourselves into. And then, of course, comes the matter of, and I'm going to actually stop at the second aspect. In principle, I agree with Dr. Saab that we have to comply with whatever commitments we have made, but there is always a plan B. Remember that all the pressures that we keep on talking about, all the bankruptcy and all that, is essentially a function of your external payments. Internally, Pakistan had said that it is not going to meddle with State Bank of Pakistan, but it is not very difficult to actually go to the old ways and start using it as the government's personal piggy bank. So remember that there will be, if IMF keeps on punishing us and keeps on playing with us, then Pakistan might actually end up relapsing to the old ways. It might actually succeed in getting out of the bog, it might not. But that is a risk IMF should not be taking.
Right, absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit more about what you said. Dr. Khaqan, the issue with reference to the kind of factors that may be influencing IMF's stance or the actions and statements that we've been hearing coming out from the IMF, and the fact that Pakistan has faced so much delay in making sure that this bailout package actually proceeds forward. Do you really think that in terms of where we stand today is only a matter of the conditions or the factors that the IMF has pointed out, or the fact that they want to refer to the political situation of the country impacting the economic choices of the country as well, that there is nothing larger than that is at play, as Farrukh was pointing towards?
So it's a bit of both, right? I mean, let's look at the kind of difficulty that occurred, following the events of what transpired in May. Anyone looking from the outside, look at it through their lens. People sitting outside Pakistan who are not Pakistanis or non-resident Pakistani. These are people who are just looking at it from the pictures that they get, the kind of programs that are run on Pakistan. So everyone probably got a little distracted there, right? The events were not normal. Never probably in our history have we seen the kind of clashes that occurred at the military installations. So I think that also irked a little bit. Secondly, rightly said, there is a geopolitics there. There is a stronghold of Indians not only in the multilateral institutions, but Pitafi Saab, let me add to your thing. Many of the corporations there are now headed by the personnel from our neighborhood, and they themselves have a big influence. So, money makes the mayor go. They are controlling trillions of dollars there. They are controlling trillions on the stock exchange. So all these things make a difference. So, of course, geopolitics. And of course, the region has changed. Afghanistan has changed. Our friendship with Iran has been revitalized by the government. So all these things are there as well. China has come to help you without the IMF by giving you the $2 billion that you sent back to them. All these things are signals. But having said that, my first premise is that I must comply on what I have agreed with them in terms of keeping the open market and the interbank market rate at a reasonable level. It is right now at 10 to 11%. So that is something. We may have internal challenges. There may be internal manipulation, but that is for the state bank to then figure it out, sort. On the second thing, we must go after and get the $10 billion pledges. That's again our work to do for the Planning Commission to ensure that the projects are done, so that we must go after them. So what I'm trying to say is that you improve upon the kind of dollar financing that you have promised. on that front, maybe not 3 billion, but if you can promise them $4 to $5 billion. And here, I think the fund is being extra careful. I have said this to the fund folks many times that once you give us a stamp of approval, not only would we get the 3 billion from the Saudi Arabia and UAE, Chinese monies, multilateral flows, commercial flows. We have, I think, returned about $3 billion on the commercial loans. We would be able to get them back right now with the kind of credit rating that we have. Stamp of approval of the IMF is a must for us to, go to the. So we may be able to raise that. And then, the country is reeling under supply side constraints that is hampering people's daily lives in terms of, the cotton that we need, the pharmaceuticals that we need, the other supplies. This is raising inflation in the country. So, a vicious cycle has been created. To help with that, I think the IMF funds, the IMF stamp of approval can help. And lastly, we should not hesitate to make the right budget. A real gift that this government can leave us with is the fact a good budget, fiscally responsible, with expenditure controls, a bit of taxation on the other areas where there is under taxation, that will bring down inflation. And then in October, people go to elections and you see a downward shift in inflation, people would remember that. I think that's the kind of atmosphere we see.
Right, and I understand what you're pointing towards. But Farrukh, I also want to understand that when we talk about the IMF and the fact that it's of course helping us with reference to the kind of plan of action that the government needs to take and how to take any country's economy out of the current crisis that they're in. Is it an assumption if we say that whatever policies or recommendations or conditions that the IMF puts forward are not are the best ones forward, and whether or not they're tough or they may, of course, make things difficult for the country, they are still the best available option? And if this assumption is correct, then what really is stopping us from outrightly just accepting all the conditions?
Yeah, Sana, short of spiritual economics that I was earlier referring to, macroeconomics and economic theory would actually suggest that the recommendations on the whole are correct. Okay. And they are the right thing to do. We have to do it if you want to actually ensure that your economy becomes better, because there has been a lot of many decades that has been there, and there are many silos of lack of accountability in your economy which keep on growing, and that's why your economy actually is destabilized because of those elements. So theoretically, what IMF has been demanding or what we committed to might be a little strict, especially when it comes to compliance, but theoretically it is correct. But remember that he is a guy, you're talking to a person who for past 30 years has been saying that there are many good examples of IMF's help. One country that we keep on talking about is Turkey. Turkey is a great example that got a bailout in early 2000s, and since then it has been going northward. It hasn't come down. Similarly, India's own story is quite linked with its cooperation or cooperation with IMF's recommendations, especially Manmohan Singh, when he was finance minister, was highly aided and abetted by IMF. But there is something that has changed. And that is that when this dialogue between India and IMF was going on, while IMF might not have changed immediately, India was changing. And today, India's government is quite different. Remember when I was talking about May 9th and Dr. Saab said that imagine how it is going to actually appear to the international punters. That is true. But you have to realize that there were people who wanted us also to be close to precipice. And honestly, at this moment, people don't realize. I think information will come out how close we came to precipice. Before May 9th, I told you that Pakistan, inshallah, will survive if it has to by sheer bloody mindedness. And we have proven again and again that this is exactly what we have been doing, right? Now the tale of the other side, India. India's diaspora might be very influential, but remember, most of them actually have been benefiting from India's image as a democracy, as a country that is multicultural, multi-ethnic, and which is really diverse. And now you have a government for now, past 9 years, which has been actually trying to enforce a kind of a uniformity inside India and outside India as well. So the diaspora is also very quickly getting tired of Indian government. Remember that there is this limit to which you can leverage your power or your diaspora. So whatever IMF is doing, especially because the people that we are talking about are not merely Indians, but they are also Trump era holdovers. So they are going to actually keep on pushing the system towards another pro-Trump kind of world order. But that said, I tell you that whatever jig was there, it is almost up. And in next year's elections, you are going to see a lot of surprises. We have seen in Karnataka in India. So Pakistan can convince all others. Recently, this change of heart, India also cancelling or actually converting SEO summit to virtual. And this, it actually came from a very interesting election. And the election was Turkey's election, where George Soros had positioned himself as a critic of Erdogan. So he has also criticized Modi. So these guys were looking at what happens in Turkey, because Turkey survived. They thought that they might be able to survive as well. But sirs, your own diaspora, your own billionaires abroad are very tired. And remember that because of the pro-Trumpian policies, there has been a change in America as well. In America, if you think that the right wing is rising, honestly, their beef is essentially not with Muslims. Muslims, or the threat that was posed by the Islamists, is so day before yesterday. Similarly, blacks don't pose any serious threat to their jobs. Who does? It is Indians who have been taking their jobs, right? All, Dr. Saab is right, all Fortune 500 companies, many of them are headed by Indians. So right now, so far, the right wing in Europe and America might have actually hedged around the fact that they don't want to upset their bosses, the new bosses. But honestly, they are going to explode as well, and the time is 2024. So before that, I think India will have to change, and then the Indian diaspora will have to get rid of Indian government's burden. So at this moment, if they are being cocky because something happened in Turkey, I tell you, in India's own state, Karnataka, what happened must be instructive. So all this chokehold that we are in, economic chokehold, it doesn't serve India. It is going to undermine its government as well eventually, and it doesn't actually benefit us either. We'll have to work with IMF, but we'll have to bring them to their senses.
All right. Dr. Khaqan, with reference to the budget that you keep pointing at also, it's important, of course, that it is in line with what the IMF is also talking about. And it seems that the Prime Minister has also commented towards that and has spoken to the Finance Ministry in this regard as well. But at the same time, of course, we heard Mr. Ishaq's statement as well with reference to the IMF also being in an embarrassing situation if the ninth review doesn't really materialize. And at the same time, we're also hearing news coming in that perhaps the budget is more expansionary in scope, and of course with reference to the current political scenario, it may seem that the political decision making is also going to factor in the budget. Do you think with the current scenario with the IMF, the government will be able to take a strong stance on what the budget should be like, especially with what the IMF is expecting the country, despite the kind of political implications that it may hold?
So, Sana, I mean, I always say that the political governments have to always keep the hopes of people high, so that they can connect to the government and think that the government is working for them, by them, and it is trying to do the best for them. But having said that, Sana, this is probably the most difficult budget anyone has ever done in Pakistan. Let me give you a number. For example, next year, when we do the markup and interest payments, they are going to range somewhere between 7,000 to 8,000 billion rupees, right? I mean, let's take the midpoint, 7,500 billion rupees. We'll get the exact figure from Q Block. When you make your FPR and your non-tax revenue, and you put both of them together, and you give the monies from the FPR money to the provinces, I think you're going to not be able to even pay the interest payment from the federal monies that are left with the federation. How broken can any country's budget be? How difficult can any country's budget be when you have to take a loan to pay the markup for that year, everything else, pensions, defense services, running of the civil governments, grants and transfers, subsidies, provision of emergency development. These are the exact heads that I'm giving you are going to be funded through debt. How difficult are we, seeing the budget come through? So in that, to imply a high relief, I think government will not have a lot of space to do that. Let me give you three reliefs I think that will be there. And we can talk after the budget and you can quote me. Number one, I think the pensions will go up. Number two, 1A would be pensions. The 1B would be, I think, the salaries of the employees of the government would go up. Hopefully by 15 to 20%. That would be the responsible thing to do. Number two, I think the income support program would go up. Every government, it's a flagship program. It's a program I'm always proud to talk about. 20 billion PPP, 130 billion PMLN, around 300 when PTI was leaving, and now about 350. I think that will go up. And lastly, I think you'll see a change in the minimum wage that we have. So I think this will be the very common man relief. The other relief I think that you'll see some fertilizer subsidies, some hopefully direct subsidies, the laptop schemes, and all those things that you see. So I think that, but I would hope that it is a fiscally responsible budget. We see a fiscal correction to somewhere 5.5% of GDP as the fiscal deficit, and that will bring down inflation. That will bring down the next year's current account deficit. And when there is an election cycle happening in April, according to the constitution, if we go by the election cycle, people would remember the government, I hope, more fit.
Right. And Dr. Khaqan, the kind of things that you mentioned, none of these are objectionable to the IMF?
Sana, actually what I'm mentioning is very much acceptable to the IMF. Direct subsidies through the income support program, expenditure expansion, but careful. I would like to see more on the pension side. If there is a pension reform that is there, then there is of course the tax side that you can do. Hopefully this 9,200 billion rupees that we are talking about, the tax target for the next year, I hope that would include some direct measures of taxation on real estate, on the wholesaler, on the retailer, and these would be measures that would be expansionary of the tax base. So let's hope we see some of them. Let's hope we see that there is not more taxation on the corporate side. These would all be largely acceptable to the IMF. But if you do more expansion on the subsidies, which are indirect, that would not be. If you give subsidy of 118 billion to the textile or the export sector, that's something that's not acceptable to the IMF. But I don't think the government has even room or space to go that way. And they must also remember one thing, Sana, the most important thing, that somewhere in the middle of August, they would not be there. So if they were to do a very expansionary budget, even it would be left to announcements, because they would not be able to see that till October if they were to come back. So a responsible budget would be the best thing that they could do.
Right, absolutely. And Farrukh, I'd like to take your take on the budget as well, but also add to that the possibility then that if we are, of course, moving very closely to the end date of the possibility of the IMF bailout package, and if it is diminishing with time, then if we're not able to secure the IMF bailout package, of course, we keep on talking about how so much else is dependent upon this stamp by the IMF, and if we don't have that, then where do you think Pakistan can possibly proceed with the current economic challenges, and what other options can it explore?
Right, Sana, what IMF seems to be employing here is called delayed gratification, right? Because they're not giving us certification, we cannot actually deal with other countries. But that doesn't mean that the country never has the kind of options. Every country wants to be independent, and every country wants to ensure that it stays out of bloc politics, that it does not end up with one side or the other, right? And that is the optimum, direction that we should be taking. But if IMF keeps on doing it, do you think that there are no other parties or no other punters or bidders for influence in this part of the world? I think there are many. Of course, we have this China-America relationship, and we have to maintain both. But there are others as well. For example, recently we opened up with Iran, and I hope that we keep on opening up. But then there is Russia. There are so many other elements where Pakistan can seek a lot of help, right? So remember that miscalculation has been hallmark of American foreign policy, and there can be some kind of miscalculation because essentially IMF is a product, an outcome of the world order that was established by America, not by India, not by Russia, not by China, right? So in the end, they can actually end up compromising their long-term interest in this region. They are the people who actually went with Chiang Kai-shek rather than the Komi Dang of the, Gulcha Dang of the Chinese, China itself. And they actually ended up on the opposite side of whoever was going to win. So that is never an optimum outcome. Regarding expansionary issues, I tell you what, I think that when Dr. Saab in the last answer started speaking, I thought that I'm going to say that he's a clever man. Then after a minute, I thought that let me call him a smart man. And I'm now going to I've actually concluded I'm going to call him a wise man, right? He's really wise. And I think the kind of construction he had in mind, especially when it comes to various aspects, there's one contentious issue, and that is pension reform. I think the entire world is going to have a pension crisis because the elderly population is increasing. And then in Pakistan, it is going to be such a humongous issue that I think that there can be a charter of pensions, not only charter of economy, leave alone everything, and you can have a serious debate on that between all these stakeholders. It is a very big issue. But having said that, I don't think that the construction that Dr. Saab gave, especially the salary increases, direct taxation, particularly at retail sector, any of that is wrong or it is expansionary. But that actually depends on your vantage point. Dr. Saab has dealt with IMF, but I don't know whether he has come across the current team in IMF at all, because their point of view is essentially going to be that it is expansionary even still, because you don't have the money that you will be pledging, right?
Absolutely.
So in the end, I tell you what will happen. If there is going to be an actually expansionary budget, and then the government actually comes to its end, and there is going to be a caretaker setup, I tell you there are going to be two budgets. One that we are going to see being announced in the parliament, and then a corrective one by the caretaker setup. Because I don't think that the current set of political parties realize what kind of change has happened in Pakistan and how serious a concern elections have ceased to be. There used to be a huge concern, but now, right now, there is a reconstruction going on at such a massive level. Someday when we are going to talk about politics, I'm going to draw your attention to those elements. And if you look at that, things are going to crystallize that at this moment elections is the last thing anybody is worried about. Right now economy is serious, and then the kind of damage that was tried on May 9th, that is the thing. Now before I conclude, and I know that you would like to go back to Dr. Saab very quickly, let me also appeal to Dar Saab's spiritual side. I tell you, let me say that when nothing else works, spirituality works, right? he should actually go for some kind of consultation, the kind of, you consult God through dreams and all, and see if, check the veracity of my statement. But my veracity, the fact is, whatever happens to me in the end happens to the country also. So make me rich and see the country actually getting richer as well.
Right, absolutely. And I have a clarification to ask as well, but I'll come back to that once I've spoken to Dr. Khaqan. Dr. Khan, of course, my question to Farrukh was what other option there is other than the IMF. But with regards to this bailout package ending on the 30th of June, does our story with the IMF end here? Or do you think that immediately perhaps the government can engage the IMF again on another level, perhaps for another package?
So what I'm hoping for is that the 9th review is done. If the 9th review is done and even the 10th and the 11th review are not done, I think that will still leave a bit of more comfort as to Pakistan being responsible and IMF being equally responsible and equally, operative with Pakistan. So that leaves both in a favorable position. Then we need some money to ride out the next couple of months. Chinese money, some money would have come from the IMF, the UAE, the Saudi Arabian funds. All these put together can ride us, the next couple of months while we start discussing a new package with the IMF. And this time, we can do, thank you, Pitafi Saab is so kind in his words towards me. We can think about what that package is. I think it has to be beyond 3 years. It has to be a bigger package. It has to involve serious structural reforms of the economy, and so on. And once the new government is coming into shape, I would hope that the contours of such a package would be there and they could immediately put in their mind to it and take it up from there. So I think that seems to be the future. Okay. We need $25 billion next year in terms of debt servicing that we need to put together. Barring the current account, if I keep that as zero. So let's be thinking about it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Khaqan, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And Farrukh, my earlier clarification was with regards to the concerns that you were pointing out with reference to the caretaker setup and the budget and the way it can possibly be impacted. Then, in light of all of the situation, does the statement from the IMF not become sort of fair or valid in terms of the connection between the political measures or stability that is needed for the economic measures to also materialize?
Yeah, that becomes fair because they have been the more fairest of them all over the world. They are very fair in the Latin Americas. They have been very fair with Egypt, where there is a perpetual dictatorship which was replaced by a brief stint of an elected government, and at that time IMF almost boycotted them, and then again there's another dictator there, but that's okay. So don't tell me that they have our good in their heart. It is especially power politics, and that is being played, and IMF is being played not by the US but by Indians and Trumpian holdovers, and they can do whatever they want. Remember that it is not merely our future online, it is also IMF's own future, because they seem to be dismantling American world order that was there, and in the end IMF also suffers because of that. It is said with great grief that the kind of politics they are trying to push around seems to be failing. For example, Bangladesh, the country they bailed out recently, its rating was reduced today. It doesn't have the highest rating, and it is, although it is stable, but it is in the negative. And this was a country that could have been seen as an example of India's closeness, and that doesn't seem to be going further.
Right.
So with that kind of a situation, in the end, if a Trumpian world order returns, the first thing to go will be IMF.
All right. We're going to quickly also talk a little bit about what is going on in India, especially in Manipur state, and the kind of violence that we have seen. We know that according to reports, about 80 people have lost their lives, unfortunately, and it seems that the BJP government is trying to intervene and see what the situation is. But in terms of what is going on within India, do you think that this sort of ethnic violence that we see in this particular state is something that is out of the ordinary, or is restricted to the ethnic tribes or issues of the state state itself, or is representative of what is going on within the country, and perhaps a larger, more fundamental response is required?
Right, Sana. I think earlier when we were talking about India's global influence, I was talking about fraying of that influence. Let me also talk about the internal impact of that as well. Remember that Manipur is actually part of Seven Sisters, the states that are there, but barely part of India. If you have seen the geography, they are actually barely connected with the mainland, right? And they have been subject to a lot of turbulence in the past, and there has been a lot of problem, sometimes from communists, sometimes from the communal side, because essentially Hindutva government tries to impose or enforce their own uniformity to everybody. And there are states where they don't have the clear majority of the sort, there is always going to be a problem. Add to it the fact that India is also a stratified country, right? It has ethnically, horizontally many divisions, but it has vertical divisions as well. And the reason why India's Hindu class actually allowed BJP to come to power was for Hindu consolidation. And that meant that the differences between caste should go away, right? Pose Muslims or Christians, or for that matter communists, as the common enemy, and then force all the castes of India to come together and to work together and keep on attacking the othered element. But that again also has a similar problem, law of diminishing returns. Eventually people get tired and there is no more boogeyman left to actually attack. And this is exactly what is happening. Now what they are doing is they are trying to actually eliminate all the reservations that were for the lower caste or the vulnerable caste. And why? Because the Brahmins, which are the uppermost caste, are only 5% of India. The actual India belongs to these people who are fighting for their rights, right? Because of that kind of a situation, this uniformity is going to have a massive blowback. And right now you're thinking that it is merely Seven Sisters, or for that matter Manipur. You will see similar kind of things happening in the coming days in UP when there is going to be a national election. UP is, by the way, so big, its population is next to Pakistan's, right? Almost similar population. And there they have been repeatedly attacking Muslims to consolidate the Hindu vote. But in the end, it's always about the economy, stupid. In the end, no matter how much biases you play upon, it is going to be about economics and the lower caste actually, because they are so vulnerable, and India is not essentially a very fair or equitable country. The poor are going to demand their rights. When they don't get it, they are going to bite the heads of all these people who are privileged, and actually lecture them to forego their own reservations or their quotas for the sake of the collective good of the Hindu population.
Right. Thank you very much, Farrukh, for those comments. And of course, with reference to what is going on, not just in India, but in the world as well, this is something important to take a look at. And of course, Pakistan is also, there is also a need of a lot of introspection in terms of where we stand today, particularly the kind of political and economic challenges that we face. And we can only hope for that whatever it is, whether it's IMF or not, that we are at least on the right track in terms of the measures that are required by the country. And of course, more will be seen as we hear from the budget. But that's all that we have from the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.